Let's speak now to Mark Littlewood, Director of Popular Conservatism. Good morning to you, Mark.
Hi, it's great to be with you.
It is no surprise to me that the socialist left of the Labour Party, the people who've been more suited to school politics, the sort of reverse Robin Hoodism that they seem to want to put in place, that doesn't work. We know it doesn't work from history. There are big calls now for Rachel Reeves to implement a wealth tax. But apparently, despite being pressed by backbenchers and the unions to levy a new tax on savings, investments and property portfolios of the wealthy, she's trying to resist it, which is probably a good thing, because as nice as it sounds, that those with the broadest shoulders should bear most of the weight, in reality what happens is those with the broadest shoulders just go to places where they don't have to get taxed that much.
Those with the broadest shoulders are getting pretty fed up, Alex. You just mentioned the number of millionaires leaving London. This is a disaster for Rachel Reeves and anyone who wants the money to keep pouring into the Treasury coffers. You've got to bear in mind it's the rich who pay a very disproportionate amount of tax. Sure, some of them are pretty good at handling their affairs, but generally speaking, we need many more millionaires in Britain, not many fewer, if you want to fund public services. So I think Reeves is right that a wealth tax would simply exacerbate this brain drain, this flight of capital from the UK. It would obviously be a colossal disincentive to any rich person who was thinking of relocating to the UK or perhaps opening a business in the UK. The minute you even get a smell of wealth taxes, I think you're far better to consider, I don't know, going to Singapore or the United Arab Emirates or the United States. So this won't work. I'm glad that the reports are suggesting she's going to squash it, but the problem she's got is all the pressure on her are from Labour MPs and backbenchers who want taxes to go up even further. That's all the pressure she's going to be feeling between now and the budget.
I mean, what has been proposed, and I've heard this a number of times over the past weeks, by good old Lord Kinnock, who seems to have dug himself out of from whether he's been hiding and throwing in his two-bit on a repeated basis at the moment, is that there should be a 2% tax on assets worth more than £10 million. Now, people out there will be thinking, not many people have things worth £10 million. If you've got stuff worth £10 million, 2% isn't much at all, is it? You can afford to pay that, surely. Why is it such a disastrous idea?
Well, first thing I say, it disincentivises people who are at or above that sort of level to stay in the UK or come here. There are also some big practical problems. I mean, we have a tough enough job trying to work out what everybody's income is in Britain. But imagine trying to work out exactly how much stuff everybody has. OK, you could look at the value of the property they live in, but they might have a pretty big mortgage on that. How are you going to go through things like their art collection, their wine collection, their jewellery collection, how many cars they've got? Somebody's going to have to come around from the HMRC to check off all of these things for anyone who we suspect might be worth more than £10 million. So the administration of it is a complete nightmare. And I would suggest pretty easy to avoid. Let's imagine a person who's very rich and has a lot of highly valuable paintings. Well, I imagine you just take them down off your wall and hide them away when the taxman comes around. Very easy to avoid, very difficult to administer, and sends all of the wrong signals. Tells people we don't want rich and successful people in Britain. Thanks very much. We're going to penalise you. Just the wrong message to send when the government's finances and economic growth are in an incredibly tricky spot.
I mean, this is the thing, you know, as much as we might not like it, as much as wouldn't it be lovely in the sort of sixth form politics world if everything was evenly distributed and that everyone could have comfort, because if the top 2% who are worth paid then actually there'd be no poverty in the world. Yay, that's great. It just doesn't exist like that, because when people have a lot of money, they have a lot of access, they have a lot of freedom, they have a lot of liberty to pick and choose where they go. You know, not many countries turn down somebody with billions of pounds £1,000,000, they'll say, yes, come on in here, make your investments here, buy the expensive houses, contribute to the economy, and we're going to tax you less than that place to make sure that where you do pay tax, it's over here. That's just the way it works. And we've learned that the latest person to ship off, if you will, is a billionaire shipping tycoon from Norway, John Fredrickson, who says the UK has gone to hell, and he's put up his £250 million London mansion for sale. He is the UK's 9th richest man, or was as he's going, with £13.7 billion. But what I've learned, and I don't know if you can tell me more about this, is actually a lot of these multi-million pound properties in London are absolutely falling in value because of the flight of so much wealth from the capital.
Yeah, that's right. I gather that as well. He's put it on the market, as you say, Alex, for £250 million. I'm afraid that's a little bit out of my price range, so I won't be making a bid on it or anywhere close. It's about 500-600 times beyond my price range. But I do know one or two people who live quite near it, and they're very sceptical that he'll realise that amount of money. He might have to accept 200 million, maybe a bit less, the poor lamb. But you're quite right. You would expect the value of super rich properties to fall because it's not just a wealth tax coming in. People start anticipating what might happen. So a good number of people are leaving the country for fear that there will be wealth taxes of some sort or some other scheme by the Labour government to squeeze yet more money out of them. They might not know what it is. The government might not have set out what it is. It might not even come to pass. But if you have the fear that that's going to happen, well, you start, packing up, putting your properties on the market and looking for somewhere else to go. I think this chap's heading off to the United Arab Emirates, if I'm right. We should perhaps have a bit of a long, hard look at the sort of tax and spend systems of the countries that these people are fleeing to, because it's a win-win for them and a lose-lose for us.
Well, yeah, I mean, Dubai notoriously doesn't seem to charge people tax at all, so lucky them if they can afford to have that sort of policy in place. Let us talk now about Nigel Farage, because he's in all of the pages of all the newspapers today, because he's about to roll out his crime and punishment policy, or at least a glimpse of what might be to come under a Reform UK government. We're a long way off from a general election, therefore manifesto pledges. But he's going to say today that violent criminals and sex offenders would never be released early if he becomes Prime Minister, that there'd be a new prison building programme to provide 30,000 new places using things like old MOD sites, that he wants to flood certain areas with things such as stop and search, potentially stopping as many as 1 in 5 people in crime hotspots, potentially even introduce curfews for teenagers where there is a lot of antisocial behaviour. And I think the most striking part of this policy is the idea as well that some of the most violent criminals he is prepared to ship off to countries who might offer their services, like El Salvador, to incarcerate them abroad instead. Now, the political opposition to this is coming from obviously the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, both who sort of echo similar sentiments, which is this is nonsense, it's not being costed, he can't do it, naysayerism basically. And he said, well, look, I'm going to show you my costing documents. They're going to come out to you today. This has been added up and is deliverable. And I'd assume he would also say something along the lines of, well, once we leave the ECHR and take back control of our own legislature, there'll be no problem in shipping off crims to places like El Salvador. Is this brave? Is this audacious? Or is this a fairy tale?
It'll be all of those things, I suppose, Alex. But I think I'm on the slightly more sympathetic to Nigel Farage end of the spectrum. I am fascinated to see the costings. If I do have a slight criticism of Reform in recent weeks, there's an awful lot of what they're going to do, a good chunk of which I like the sound of, but not a huge amount of detail yet about how they're going to pay for it. So I'm going to look for those costings later today with great interest. Look, Nigel Farage is right, isn't he, that our justice system and our prison system has fallen into disrepair and disrepute. I don't think it's acting as a sufficient deterrent. I do think we need to have a long, hard look about whether we should really be sending people to prison for very short sentences of a few weeks or a couple of months. It might be we could take some pressure off the system if we essentially kept it for violent or very serious offences. Sort of, if you're going to prison, expect to be there for a good 2, 3, 4 years or much longer. That, I think, might take some pressure off the system. But he also points out, now, again, it will take quite a bit of genius to pull this off, but there's over 10,000 foreign criminals in our prison that he would seek to deport. I'm not sure he would necessarily be able to get rid of all of them, but that would free up space as well. So the naysayers, who are right to ask for exactly how this is costed, exactly how it will work, is Nigel Farage really suggesting that when you get a sentence of 8 years, you have no chance of parole in 4, or 10 years, no chance of parole in 5? That would really put the burden on the prison system higher. But at least he's thinking out of the box. I think anyone who says, let's pretty much carry on as we have been for the last few years, is really a depressing thought that we could possibly do that. Crime is a serious problem, and you sort of get the sense that our sort of social fabric is fraying at the edges as well, and undoubtedly faith in the justice system is starting to plummet. So if you don't like Nigel Farage's imaginative thinking, my message to other politicians would be come up with some pretty imaginative thinking of your own.
Right, because this is it. I do find politically what we keep hearing is it can't be done. Well, we can't stop boats because of ECHR. We can't deport foreign criminals because of no returns agreement. We can't do this because of planning regulations. We can't do this because of this, some directive here, some directive there, intransigent and uncooperative civil service, etc. And I kind of think, well, you can't just run a country by saying all of the problems we've got can't be solved because we're stuck in a Gordian knot of legislation, which has accumulated over the course of decades of supranational socialism. And now our hands are so tied that nothing that we want to do to run our country is feasible. And yet that seems to be constantly the message echoing in the rhetoric of most politicians. So perhaps it is a glimmer of sunlight at the end of the tunnel that Suella Braverman has revealed a blueprint for leaving the ECHR. It is a legal blueprint, a 56-page document. She's, of course, a former Attorney General. And it's sort of, because before we heard, you can't even leave the ECHR because what about the Good Friday Agreement? Oh, you can't do it. But apparently she says, well, you can do it. And this is how it could be done. Thank goodness, some might say, that people are beginning to flesh out some of these promises because, by gum, when it gets to 2029, they're going to have to deliver.
Yeah, that's right. I'm delighted that Suella's written this pamphlet in association with the Prosperity Institute think tank, who I'm very fond of. And I think she is right to highlight in the newspapers today that surely for people of a certain modicum of common sense, the question isn't should we leave the ECHR, it's how do we do it? And you can't just do it at the stroke of a pen. You're right, Alex, the Good Friday Agreement would take some nuancing. It's not beyond the wit of man if people of good faith are willing to work together to get that done. So I'm delighted she's now mapping out the blueprint for how we're actually going to leave. And you're right about this rather pessimistic sort of haze that now infects all of politics. We can't do X because of Y. We can't do A because of B. The truth is that we have tended to tie our hands in a vast number of ways over recent years, as you point out, through supranational institutions and agreements. We might have unravelled ourselves from the EU thanks to Brexit, but there's a huge amount else to unravel ourselves from if we are serious about making tough decisions. And if a new government of whatever stripe or flavour comes to power in 2029 that is serious about achieving it, it won't just have to have the ideas and the policies. It will have to have this blueprint of exactly how to do it. Which parts of the legal system, which parts of the law, which parts of our sprawling bureaucracy need to be removed or amended. Because I think if you don't do that and sort of level the playing field, you'll find that any meaningful or imaginative reforms are effectively going to be an exercise in pushing water uphill. So if you're attracted, or your viewers and listeners are attracted to this sort of agenda, they need to insist that the politicians don't just come up with those ideas, but know how to remove the roadblocks to those ideas. The Human Rights Act, the ECHR, the Equality Act, the Equality Commission, and all of the rest of it. Fortunately, we've got a few years. Well, I say fortunately, unfortunately, we're going to have a few more years of this grim government. We've got a few years to work it out. A good start by Suella Braverman in starting to work out one piece of that jigsaw today.
Yeah, no, indeed. Do you know, I tell you what it feels like. It feels like every time we get a new government, it's like you haven't cleaned out your oven and you're putting more policy in to cook and you open the oven door and all the smoke comes out and your eyes are stinging, you can't even see what you're doing. And yet they're just putting more and more and more things to sort of, you know, put on the conveyor belt of policy delivery. And I'm like, can we just stop and clean the oven first? Would that not help?
That's a very good way. That's a great way of putting it. I mean, I think really at the last election, the electorate said, well, let's see if things taste better if we get a new chef. But I think a year after that, they're starting to think we don't need a new chef, we need a whole new recipe.
You need a new kitchen, right?
A new kitchen, a new recipe, new ingredients, and a new chef. We need to do the whole enchilada. Just changing the cook has not really changed the quality of the food that we're eating. That's being gruel, isn't it, that our politicians are serving to us rather than anything nicer or more nutritious.
I wonder how far we could take this analogy from Boris's oven-ready deal to Theresa May's jam tomorrow to the thin gruel we're being served, like you said, by the Labour Party. This is sort of an analogous theme that could go on for a long time. Thank you ever so much to Mark Littlewood, Director of Popular Conservatism.